Well, that's a good point that you made about the fact that even if this idea of secession never results in any actual movement, it may influence the federal relationship to Vermont. And I lived in Quebec for 2 years while the Parti Québécois was there, and René Lévesque was organizing referendums for separation from Canada. And the referendums never succeeded, but the Parti Québécois did succeed in becoming the government of Quebec, and they made a lot of changes which were beneficial to the people of Quebec, even though the ultimate ideal of separation never happened. And this, the same thing could happen here in Vermont, don't you think?
Yes. Separation didn't happen in Quebec because the federal government, quite sensibly, established national bilingualism, which has been very effective, and gave Quebec cultural autonomy. And that was enough for them to say, well, Canada's a pretty good country otherwise, and as long as our language and our customs are being recognized within the federal government, we'll stay. And as far as I know, there is no effective independence movement in Quebec now, in spite of all of the passions that were involved, because they were resolved sensibly and democratically.
And we could have the same thing here. For instance, the federal government could give us, Bernie has applied for a special status for Vermont as far as health care goes. The federal government could allow that, and that could allow us to have single-payer health care in Vermont. And they could allow the Vermont State Guard to stay home and defend Vermont and not go to foreign wars. And maybe that would be enough for us, don't you think?
Well, that would certainly be a step in the right direction. The trap in that is that the United States has forward bases, that is, attack bases, combat bases, in 155 nations. Now, exactly what American interests we're defending there, unless it's the local corporations and, you know, McBurger or something like that, I can't imagine 155 nations. And the cost of that is way beyond the cost of actual fighting warfare. It's the costs of an entire global empire, and it's quite shocking that instead of using regular troops, they're using National Guard troops who are supposedly weekend warriors who stay home and fight if we're threatened. The idea of sending them overseas instead of using the people who are in the 155 million and who volunteered for full service, it just seems like the arrogance of empire. There's simply no need to be using any of the 50 state National Guards in a nation as militarized as us, and with bases in 155 countries, which is almost all of them. I mean, apparently we don't have any bases in Tristan da Cunha or Tierra del Fuego, but there can't be many places where we don't have bases, except the places that are actively opposed to us, like Russia or someplace, China. But otherwise, we've pretty well occupied the world. And it's too expensive, and it's a bad idea to begin with. We ought to be getting along better with our neighbors.
You mentioned the Tea Party. One thing that concerns me about Dennis is that his economic ideology seems to reflect Ron Paul and perhaps the Tea Party group, which I am very much opposed to. And also, you mentioned that this is we're interested in a legal process in dealing with the federal government. But it concerns me that Dennis seems to be not so concerned with the legalities, and it's a little bit radical for me. What do you think about that?
Well, if you're talking about the libertarian philosophy?
Yes.
Well, the libertarian philosophy sounds a lot to me like, you know, every man for himself, every woman for herself, every child for himself, but that's God bless the child who's got its own. We have to help the people who need help. And the only reasonable way to do that is to take the resources from the people who have vastly more than they need, the 2% of Americans who really control much of the economy, and move that down to help the, not just the desperate, not just the homeless and the, people in homeless shelters and the people who are begging on the street, but the people who are trying to make ends meet and having trouble doing that, with college tuition skyrocketing, for example. As Bernie says, if we could even get the single-payer health care system in, we would have enough money that no public college would have to charge tuition. And may I say that when I went to public colleges in the late 1950s, none of them, not the State University of New York, nor the City University of New York, charged a penny in tuition. And we could afford to do that now.
That's how I feel about it. The libertarian philosophy is totally unacceptable to me. I think the most important thing in the upcoming two-year election cycle is single-payer health insurance and closing down the Vermont Yankee. But it does concern me that if we do a protest vote for Dennis to oppose the war, then what happens if Brian Doobie should win the governor's race? What will happen with Vermont Yankee? What will happen with single payer? And we know that races can come very close. For instance, the vote count, the votes are being recounted now for the primary race. 2 years ago, or 1 year ago, there was a recount for the mayor's race. How would you feel if your one vote was the cause of Brian Doobie's winning over the Democrats in November?
Well, I'm with Eugene Victor Debs, who started out organizing the railroads when it was difficult and dangerous to organize anything at all. And after helping to establish the IWW, the union I belonged to, ran as a socialist in 1912, and then when he was jailed for opposing World War I, he ran again from prison. And he got nearly 1 million votes once and 1 million votes the other time. And Debs said, it's better to vote for what you want and not get it than to vote for what you don't want and get it. I think people should vote for the candidate who most nearly represents the positions that they hold, whether they're Tea Party positions, Republican positions, Democratic positions, whether you think Ron Paul is the greatest thing. I think this would be the honest way to do the election. Otherwise, what we say is, the two choices are terrible, so I'd better vote for the less terrible.